Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Charles Green. I'm part of the marketing team here at Belatrix Software, and I'm going to be your host today. Thank you firstly all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join this call. And here today we're going to discuss the best practices for improving user experiences, but also how improving these user experiences can boost your revenues. Now, we've decided to focus on this topic because it's clear that creating compelling user experiences has become one of the top priorities of organizations. But it's also clear that one of the major trends in the past couple of years has been this divergence between customer expectations of their user experience and businesses' ability to deliver those expectations. So there are ever greater pressures to create new, richer user experiences, and today we want to explore exactly how you can do this. But before I go further, I should mention that today's session is very open. While we're going to be presenting for much of the next 45 minutes, please do feel free to ask questions. You can do that either by the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen or via Twitter. And we're going to be live tweeting throughout this webinar, so you can follow us along with the hashtag BestUX2015. And you, of course, you can also use that hashtag to ask questions. For those of you who are not familiar with Belatrix, we are a leading provider of software development services with expertise in product and mobile application development. Our focus is on innovation and really shaping the concepts and ideas of our clients into world-class software products. We have delivery centers in Mendoza and Buenos Aires in Argentina, as well as Lima, Peru. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Bruno Vilches, our resident UX expert here at Belatrix. Bruno, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, Charles. Thank you, and thank to all the audience. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Bruno Vilches, and I've been working with UX and web for more than 10 years now. And in the past year, I've been working as a product manager for an HR app. So that's basically a summary of my background.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So diving right into the agenda then for today, you can see we're going to be starting off with, how do you define user experience? What exactly is it? We're also going to, contrast that with what is a user interface and what you need to know here. We're going to give you some very concrete figures regarding how the user experience impacts businesses. Bruno is then also going to share 5 tips to rapidly improve the user satisfaction of your products and your services. We're also going to share a few additional tips for using the user interface to improve the user experience. And finally, we're going to end with looking into a bit more detail about Google Material Design and why that is effective user experience and how you can implement that in AngularJS. So a pretty packed agenda, but as I mentioned, at any time, do feel free to ask questions. We will do our best to take them during the course of the call, and also, of course, at the end once we've finished the presentation. So, Bruno, I want to kick off the discussion then about how do you define user experience? What exactly is it?
Well, Charles, actually to start talking about user experience, I think we first need to understand what it is. So nowadays there seems to be a lot of confusion with the term. So, but what we do know is that nobody can escape the concept, and whoever is building products or delivering services without thinking about it is probably doing it wrong. But going to your question, what is UX exactly, and how far does it go, and what is left out of scope? Well, UX is, you can say that it's everything that involves the interaction that the user, consumer, or client has with each product or service. And I do mean everything, from the way your employees say hi to your customers to the interaction they have with your product. So it means placing the user in the center of the spotlight. You can think of it as like it's a shift from the if you build it, they will come kind of mindset. So nowadays we have a very, very competitive world, and users have dozens of options to choose from. So whoever builds their products thinking about the user will win their hearts we'll win the race with the competitors, and we will earn a lot of money.
Okay, fascinating. And I think that's absolutely gets to the heart of it, that the user experience today has become so important, and in this hyper-competitive world, that is often the crucial differentiator between you and your competitors. So really, based on this, what then are the principles that businesses need to know to deliver this great user experience?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that to deliver a great user experience, we first need to know when it starts. When it comes to businesses, the first time the consumer learns about your brand, that is when the experience begins. Because they might have heard about it because of a friend or an ad, or maybe they just came across it on the street. But no matter how they find you, the interaction has already started at that point. That's a good thing to know. So then they'll see your products, they'll enter your stores, they'll interact with your people and buy whatever you're selling and actually use it or consume it. But in every step of the process, they usually have some expectations that you'll have to meet, but also always leave room for exciting surprises.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so really then to perhaps to summarize that, it's the user experience is covering the entire customer journey. It's really from the initial awareness of the product to considering to buy it, to actually purchasing the product, and then the continued use of the product. And I would mention to the audience today, what we have seen in much of our research is that improving the user experience is actually one reason why more and more companies are using customer journey mapping to better understand that entire customer journey. But the first step then is actually measuring that user satisfaction. So Bruno, how do you define then and measure the different kind of product features? What is valuable versus what is a nice to have?
Well, this is a really good thing to think about. You can measure user satisfaction by using some quality rank, of the features experience you are creating. For example, there are certain things that the user just take for granted. So imagine a water bottle. So you don't even think about it not dripping on you when you drink from it. You just assume it won't. So if those required qualities are not there, it can seriously hurt your business. But if they are, because they are expected, the user satisfaction doesn't actually increase. Following those, we can say there are we have some qualities that make user satisfaction increase when present, but also dissatisfaction when they're not. I'm talking about some qualities that should be highlighted when selling the product. For example, you can say extra comfortable shoes. They're not just any pair of shoes, they're extra comfortable. And following that, finally, we can describe some certain outstanding qualities that give a boost to satisfaction when they're present. But, and this is important, the lack of them doesn't actually cause dissatisfaction. They are attributes that are not normally expected, Charles. These assets are generally not mentioned because they are left to the user to enjoy its discovery. Let me give you an example, Charles. Think about the magnetized power plug of the MacBook, for instance. When you see it, you say, "Wow, that's cool." But if it hadn't been there, you would have not been thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would certainly say that's cool.
So, all these set of qualities add up for the experience that the user has with your product. So, and they're constantly evaluated since the interaction starts, as we explained before. So, no matter what stage of the experience the user is, whether it's the discovery phase, the buying phase, or the customer service phase, you will be constantly communicating. And you know what? That's the gist of it. User experience is communication. You're always saying something by an action or the lack of it. Watch out. And the user is always reacting to that. So user experience is about delivering great products and services that your clients will love. because you make them thinking about them and making those products and services sustainable through time.
Okay, excellent. I think that's a very simple and useful definition to keep in mind that, user experience is communication. And it really also captures what you mentioned earlier, that it's really going through, the entire customer journey as well. But you gave there a few examples, Bruno, that, you mentioned there water bottle, you mentioned there some shoes and, some typical products that, we're all familiar with. But how do you apply these ideas and concepts to, say, applications and to websites?
Well, Charles, when it comes to apps and websites, it's not just about making things look pretty, as you can see. There are a lot of confusion with that. Of course, that having a great user interface is a big part of the experience. We can't say it isn't, but it's clearly not the whole part. So we could say very simply that the interface is part of the product that the user faces when they look at the app. And user experience is how they feel about it. For instance, think about surfing. You can say that user experience is the feeling of the drops of water in your face, the shining sun and fresh air, the adrenaline rush when surfing a wave, and the shape of the board that helps you make all those cool turns is good user interface. So in short, the entire package is what makes it good UX, whereas good UI, user interface that is always a very important inner element of that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. They're very closely related. I think often in many cases there's some confusion between the UI versus the UX. But I think that's a very helpful and useful analogy that with surfing, how you do that. So the interface being the part you see, whereas the UX is what you feel and is the overall overarching experience. So what is actually the impact then typically of user experience on businesses?
Well, just to give you a simple answer, hugely. It impacts hugely. So it depends on your business and how far the changes you may go, obviously. But as my colleague Victoria Sampi stated in a blog post here at Belatrix, there are three main categories of metrics that can help you understand the ROI of a goal-oriented UX. For example, you can track the money earned. You can do it by conversions or average revenue per user. You can track the money saved. For example, you can track support costs or task performance efficiency. And lastly, you can also track non-monetary results. I mean user loyalty or recommendations to people. But going back to your question, how does it impact on businesses? Well, we can say that it's calculated that every dollar invested in UX yields a return between $2 and $100. So at least you're doubling your investment.
Oh,
Can you believe that?
it's very significant. But perhaps can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I can give you a really well-known example. What if I tell you that a simple change made the company earn $300 million?
Well, I would want to hear it.
Okay, the story goes like this. There was this big technological e-commerce site with a problem, but their designers didn't even know about it. So they got help from a UX expert company to see how they could improve the website, and they diagnosed that the login form was flawed. But the form was very simple. The fields were email address, password, the buttons were login and register, the link was forgot password. It was the login form for any site. You must have seen it a ton of times. But it's a so you have to ask yourself, how could they have problems with it if it's so common? Well, actually the problem wasn't as much about the form's layout as it was where the form lived. So users would encounter it after they filled their shopping cart with products they wanted to buy. And then press the checkout button. So it came before they could actually enter the information to pay for those products in the shopping cart. So the company figured out that that made them frustrated. The first time shoppers didn't actually want to make the extra for signing up to buy, but who doesn't hate that, right? And the returning customers usually forgot their login password or email addresses that they had used. So how did this UX expert company fix this? They just took away the register button. In its place, they put a continue button with a simple message. You don't need to create an account to make purchases on our site. Simply click continue to proceed to checkout. To make your future purchases even faster, you can create an account during checkout. More or less, I actually don't remember the exact words, but that was the change made. So, what were the results? Well, incredible. The number of customers buying at the site went up by 45%. And the new purchases, all those new purchases, resulted in an extra $50 million the first month. And for the first year, the site saw an additional $300 million. So you think about UI changes? Almost none. Understanding the user was the key here. So that's a very, very powerful example, I think.
Yep, absolutely, and I think it's also gets to that, the difference between the UI versus the user experience. Here, it was really about understanding the user, what was their experience as they moved through the e-commerce site, and actually kind of brings to mind a little bit to me, thinking a bit about Amazon and their one-click purchasing, and you think about how they've created a very strong user experience. It's very, very easy to go to Amazon site, just click on the purchase, and you don't even have to think about it. And it's a similar kind of concept, removing those barriers between the customer, their decision, and actually making that purchase.
Exactly, that's the idea. Charles, let me tell you something. I cheated because in the story, I omitted something on purpose. So how did they learn that the users got frustrated by the login form? Right? That's what the change the change lied. It's called the UX process. So the mindset here is clear. You can't improve what you don't measure.
Okay, so this is the how you really understand your users. So there's a set process to understand your users. So what exactly is that? And I'm sure everyone on the line today will be interested in hearing that. But before we jump to that, I should remind everyone on the call today that if you do want to ask a question about any of the topics that Bruno is discussing and going through, do feel free to write into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and also via Twitter using the hashtag BestUX2015. So do feel free to ask us questions, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So as we're saying, Bruno, tell us a bit more about this UX process.
Well, Charles, I just told you that you can improve what you don't measure, but actually even before starting to measure things, you first need to figure out what you want to know and why. This is very, very important. What is it that you need to learn to make a decision based on those research results? There will be no useful answers if you don't make the right questions, So after you decided what you want to know and why you want to know it, there are multiple tools that allow you to learn things from user. For example, you can run surveys. Just ask them what you want to know. Do you find the checkout process easy? Do you like the new colors of the website? But watch out here. Never try to convey the answer in the question because people are easily influenced and will commonly tell you what they think you're expecting. Let me give you an example of that. For example, questions as, what do you think about this cool new share button are completely out of place because you're already telling them that to you it's a cool button. Another tool is interviews. Just talk with them as a friend would do. Use pen and paper if you need to, but never ask them what they need. Uh, people usually don't know what they need, and as humans are really not good at predicting the future. But we do love giving our opinion about something, right? So it's better to present them something and then ask them if they liked it rather than asking them questions like, do you think this is a good thing to have? You can also ask them to use diaries. Diaries are just notes the user takes while using your app. There they can put whatever they think about the app, and also you can make them write down some specific insights about how they use the app on each day. Um, Finally, I think to me is the most important tool is to watch them use your app. You wouldn't believe, Charles, how differently the people use the apps than you had imagined when building them. And also you wouldn't believe how differently people behave from what they say they behave. So by observing them using your app freely, uh, maybe using the approach show me how you do that, you can learn a lot of things that you can't get from an interview or from asking questions. Um, Record the video without them not knowing, to avoid biased interactions, or just ask them to perform something that you want, some specific task, and observe them doing it. But make sure that you always measure time, because user satisfaction moves through two axes at the same time: action completeness and the time it took to do them.
Okay, excellent. And is the Bruno, should you take each of these approaches one by one? Can you address each of them together? Is there a certain structure to how would you start, say, with surveys and do interviews and then do watch people use your app? How is there a certain approach behind that?
Well, actually, Charles, tools are just one piece of the puzzle. It's not that you're going to get a lot of information from that. As I stated before, you want to know why you're asking the questions and what you want to know. You need to have a strategy. Sorry. So you have to understand that whatever tools you use, they don't exist per se. They're used to validate your assumptions. So you have to avoid executing perfectly the wrong plan. That's about it. Create the strategy, make your research, run some analysis, start designing a proposed interaction, build it, and then launch your product safely. Uh, but the important thing here is don't do it in a waterfall approach. Of course not. It's the agile era. So in every step of the process, you can evaluate your assumptions. That's what the tools are for, with your users, and iterate as many times as you need. You can also overlap processes, and you must absolutely focus on communication within the team and with your users. Uh, the thing here is that it's better why do we use the tools? Why do we iterate? Well, it's always better to discover as early as you can if you're going in the right direction. Creating a great app, as I stated before, is thinking about the users from the very beginning, even before you start building your app. So try to do the right thing instead of doing things right. So ask for subject matter expert companies to help you out with this so you can focus on your business, and rest assured that you will be delivering the best possible experience to your customers.
Okay, excellent. I think that's, it gives a very clear overview, and especially I think for many organizations which perhaps don't have that expertise in developing good user experiences, there are a lot of companies out there which can certainly help you with that. So Bruno, I know you've prepared some tips for the audience today about how they can rapidly improve the user experience of their own products and services. So perhaps let's dive straight to that.
Yeah, sure. I prepared like the most 5 quick tips that can rapidly improve user satisfaction, or at least the most the most important ones to me, of course. Um, we can start saying that you should focus on usable architecture over impressive design. Uh, Let me explain it. It's very easy to get it wrong. You want your product to get as many wows as possible, of course. You think if you're blown away by the way it looks, then that's how your users will feel as well, right? Well, actually, you're wrong. The thing is that you and your users have two different goals. You want them to be blown away, and they want the product to be useful. So, of course, first impressions count. I'm not saying that they don't. But imagine seeing a beautiful house from the outside. Can you picture it? You will be wowed. But once you enter, you realize that the bathroom is too tiny, there are too many doors, it has stairs all over the place. So I can guarantee you that that first impression you got will be easily forgotten because of the usability issues. Uh, we're talking about, instead of trying to impress first, provide the user with simple, easy to understand tools. The way to fix this mistake actually is to avoid making it in the first place. So partner up with companies that focus on UX and information architecture. The next tip I have is a very important one and usually overlooked. You need to remove unvalidated features. And let me elaborate on that. When you have a great idea, it's so easy to let your brain convince you that your product needs it. What makes this even worse is when the idea comes from one of your users. Why? Because you'll end up spending time and money building these features, and when it's done, you'll feel satisfied because you delivered value, right? You provided something new for your users. But have you? Unless you keep track of whether or not these new features are actually being used, they start to build up, and suddenly your users are faced with an endlessly growing list of options. That's very common, and most of those options actually no one uses. So this degrades your user experience by watering down the true value of what you built. And that's the core problem that you were trying to solve in the first place. So anything you add or plan to add to your product must be validated in order for it to stay there. So I mean that developing and implementing a feature is only half the battle. Next, you need to uh, run detailed analytics on whether or not it's being used. And if the analytics show it's not being used, you must remove it.
Mhm. It's a very interesting point, and actually, Bruno, that reminds me of an interesting example where a transport company, I think it was in the UK actually, they developed an app which had all the times of the local transport connections, the buses, the trains, the trams, for example. But the app had every possible time available and every possible station, but it was complex, it was not easy to use, and so what actually they found was that many people didn't really use the app. But after doing some research and doing some user research, the company found that the vast majority of users just wanted to find out the time of their next train home or their next bus home. So what they did based on that research was to strip out all these extra functionality, all these extra features, all the information that people were just simply not using, and they made a much simpler app. And it had less information, but it was far more useful. It had a far greater impact, and it was much better reviewed by the users once they made those changes.
Yeah, that's a very good example. And probably the research they run is probably using my tip number 3, that, well, we actually talked about it before, that is try to see what customers use rather than listening what they want. Because there is a huge gap between what users say they want and what they actually use. Listening to what a user wants. You ultimately leads you to selling hot dogs in the tech store because they told you they were hungry. You know what I'm trying to say here? You will be building features no one will actually use and lose focus on your actual business. So don't ask them what they want. Watch them do with the tools we've been explaining before. Um, that reminds me that observing users use apps, uh, we've discovered in these last years that they want to search rather than browse. So my tip here is create a search function, and that's my tip number 4. Since the internet moved from lists of websites to looking for what you actually want, users got used to performing their own searches. Google changed all that for us. So as a matter of fact, 50% of the users are search dominant. That means that they don't browse anymore. They just look for what they need. That's a powerful statistic there. They don't care about your drop-down menus or your sign-up or any fancy browse function you may have. They get in, search, find what they want, and get out. That's it. So if you don't put enough thought into the search function, where to place it, what to match, and how to show the info, you will be crafting a poor user experience by forcing the user to choose another option to navigate besides the one they're most comfortable with. And it's especially true for mobile when you don't have much room to browse. So it's better to supply search bar. And talking about mobile, digging on my last and final tip, I can't stress this enough. Optimize for mobile. Not thinking about it from day 0 is a huge false start. Nowadays, at least 20%, and I'm being generous here, of the 20% of total traffic comes from mobile, and that will only increase. So not thinking about page loads, navigation, giving enough room for touching links means you're not ready for mobile. And customers using their phones will get frustrated and leave you for your competition. So try to design specifically for mobile because that implies a whole different set of rules. It's very hard, to target every device at once. So get expert help to start developing the mobile version of your site for your phones or for tablets as soon as you decide to launch the product.
Okay, excellent, Bruno. And I think actually regarding that last point, optimizing for mobile, I think also it's important to remember that, of course, Google earlier this year, they changed their search algorithm so that sites which are optimized for mobile will be better ranked than those which are not. So again, that's another key reason, again, also related to the importance of search as well. So I know you've also, Bruno, prepared some advice about making changes to the user interface and how that can also rapidly improve the user experience. Perhaps we can jump to them.
Yeah, you're right, Charles. I'm preparing right now an upcoming blog post called 15 Signs of a Good User Interface. So I'll give you three right now, but do make sure to check the upcoming blog post. Okay, let me concentrate on forms. Forms are usually weak point for every app. So the user interface and user experience there is usually not that good. So let me tell you my top 3 pieces of advice to get them right. Number 1, use fewer input fields. Very important. Your users will avoid time-consuming activities. We all do, and this includes filling in forms. So each new field increases the risk of failure. So just think about what fields are really needed and remove all the rest. You need a lean process there, a lean form. If you really need a lot of optional fields, try to move some of them to the next page. Change to a paste form instead. The smaller the amount of fields, the greater the conversion. Number two, and maybe some people in our audience are really used to that. The use of undo action instead of confirmation. Just think about Gmail. It's been proven that only a small part of the actions taken by users happen by accident. So constant confirmation looks like you think that the user doesn't know what he wants. So giving your users the opportunity to undo the actions shows respect for their intellect and also allows them to take action without hesitation, you know? So especially for apps that the user is used to. As I was saying before, imagine Gmail asking you every time you swipe to delete an email if you're sure about it. It would be so annoying, and it's particularly unpleasant when the action is repetitive. Talking about undoing actions, there is like this sibling tip that I have is warn about mistakes as soon as they're made. This is very important, and most of the forms get it wrong. So what do I mean here is when filling out forms, it's better to immediately identify and show errors to the user rather than doing it later. Showing the mistake as soon as they're made gives your user the opportunity to correct them at the moment. So if they learn about them only after submitting the form, people will struggle to know what had happened, will have to take one more step, and will have to do extra work of remembering what they've done. So just show the mistake as soon as it's made so they can correct them in place.
Okay, excellent, Bruno. And I noticed that you were talking a lot about forms. And actually, we just received a question on Twitter, which is asking about a good tip for increasing your call to act or improving your call to action button. So would these tips that you suggested for improving forms, would those also apply for similar buttons, similar kind of call to action buttons?
Yeah, of course. You should always have a call to action button. It should be clearly stated. You should use verbs to indicate what the user will get out of it, and don't ask for much information, as I was saying before. Just simply a simple form, just a few forms, maybe the name or email, and do something in the call to action button. And after that, thank them and let them know what is the next step. You will be contacting them, they'll have to submit more information, whatever it is.
Okay, excellent, thank you. That's actually a good time, I think, also to remind everyone else on the line today that if you do have a question again, type it into the chat box or via Twitter using the hashtag BestUX2015, and we will be more than happy to share our knowledge and answer your questions. So moving on really to the final topic of today's webinar, before we get to the dedicated Q&A session, I want to move to Google Material Design. And I'm sure that everyone on the call today is aware that material design was introduced by Google to widespread praise by both developers as well as designers. So Bruno, can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. Let me just rewind a little bit, because after understanding the importance of UX and how to create a visually appealing UI that it's created to provide the best user experience, you have to ask yourself, so how do I create a consistent interface without starting every time from scratch? I know every product or every website is different, but you want to just forget about repeating the process. So likely many people before us asked themselves the same questions, and many of them came up with frameworks with carefully crafted user-centric UI, as I was saying. But as you mentioned, Charles, one of the main examples and hottest framework right now is Google Material Design. Uh, First, let me just clarify to the audience that I'm not related in any way to Google, and everything here is just my opinion based on my experience. So Google Material Design is a visual language. That's important word here is a visual language created by Google that synthesizes the classic principles of good design with the innovation and possibility of technology and science. It's not just a trendy, beautiful design. No, it's not. It's a thoughtfully cohesive user experience, you know. It all started with Lollipop. When I'm sure you know what Lollipop is, a version of Android last year, and rapidly became famous, and people started using it for their own apps because, as I was saying before, it solves many problems that you can just overlook when you're building your app. Last year, it won one of the most prestigious awards as the best contribution to UX, so it's something serious. Well, you can choose whatever framework you want, but once you decide to go the Google Material Design way, you need to create the elements because, as I was saying before, it's just a visual language. You need to create the elements to comply with this specification. So, but it's smarter to use one of the many implementations that there exist according to the front-end framework you use. But why? Why is that? Well, the biggest advantage of using an existing material design framework is that you get ready-to-use material design compliant CSS and components out of the box. And you can spare yourself from building them from scratch. For example, if you're using AngularJS to build your app, you could use the AngularJS version of Google Material Design that is called Angular Material. The Angular Material project is an implementation of material design, of course, in AngularJS. This project is actually very cool because it provides a set of reusable, well-tested, and accessible UI components based on the Google system. What is good about it is that it's available as open source under MIT license, and of course, as you can expect, a framework in the AngularJS ecosystem runs on directives. So all the material design components are available as AngularJS directives and services, and the behavior of those components can be controlled by the use of attributes. But why using Angular Material? Well, to me, the best and unique thing about Angular Material that other frameworks implementing it might not have is that it's supported internally at Google by the AngularJS, the Material Design UX, and other product teams, because it's done by the same company, you know? So that's a pretty solid advantage.
Yep, absolutely, and I think that's really a very comprehensive overview of material design and why it's so useful for companies who are looking to develop their own applications with a very strong user experience. And that actually brings us now to nearly the end of our presentation. We've really covered a lot of material during the past nearly 45 minutes. Bruno, do you want to perhaps just say a few words to sum up and summarize all the material we covered?
Yeah, of course. I know there's been a lot of material now, today, but I think that we covered some very important topics. The first one is that user experience is thinking in a user-centric approach. We need to focus on the user first and start creating things for them. We also talked about that UX is communication, because interaction is all about telling things to your users. So if the interaction is well done, is easy, you are communicating something about your product or your company. But if it's not, you're also communicating. Bad things, but you are communicating. We've also seen that UX is profitable because it's proven that for every dollar you invest, you can get at least the double of your investment, even 100 times more than you invested. So it's a very good thing to hire or to partner with a UX expert company because it will make you earn more money. We've also seen that UX is not UI, it's different. UI is part of a whole, and that whole is called UX. UX is also a process. You need to create your strategy. You have to analyze that strategy. You have to make some research using the tools we described, and you start creating prototypes and wireframes and iterate once and again to get the things right. You have to do things right rather than doing the right, you have to do the right thing rather than creating things right, you know? Lastly, we've seen some tips for implementing good UX, especially in forms, and then just a couple of tips that we discussed about good UI. So I think that's more or less the topics that we've covered today.
Okay, excellent, Bruno. I think some very powerful material there. And with that, I would like to open up for questions from our audience. So again, you can either type in the question on the right-hand side of your screen into the GoToMeeting, or you can also tweet us your question using the hashtag BestUX2015. And we'll stay on the line for a few minutes to see if any questions come in. And actually, we have here one question already from the audience. Bruno, so the question is, what role does design thinking play in the UX process?
Oh, Charles, that's a great question. I'm happy someone just asked that. It means our audience and us are aligned. Let me first quickly explain what design thinking is, because someone may not know. So design thinking is combining empathy for the context of a problem, creativity in the generation of insights and solutions, and rationality in analyzing and fitting various solutions to the problem context, you know? So other than the textbook definition, you can think about it as matching people needs with what is technologically feasible and viable as a business strategy. So you can say that design thinking requires putting people and their needs at the forefront, with emphasis on understanding their business context, their cultural motivations, influences, behaviors, and activities, all of which vary from different types of users. So going back to the question, how does it fit with UX? This design thinking means that sponsors of a website or an app have to first understand the value of backing up and developing an understanding of the business context, user types, work styles, and usage scenarios, either across a broad spectrum of business processes, or you can just focus within a given business unit or process. After that is when the hard work begins, because you have to assess and design workshops, you have to prototype, and you have to detail your design or development. So all in all, we can say that UX is actually doing the right thing, and design thinking is believing in it.
Excellent. And I would actually just add to that, that of course design thinking is really a framework that people can use, and at the moment it's getting a lot of attention in the business press. There are a lot of companies which are really have labeled design thinking as really one of the next approaches in business thinking. How do you approach very complex problems, problems which perhaps you would struggle to deal with in the past, and how can you deal with that? So it really has a lot of wide-ranging uses, but we're seeing that, of course, playing a fundamental role again in how you how you can improve the user experience as well. But moving on, we see we have another question from the audience, which is, what do you think about Angular Materials performance on smartphones compared to the native performance, Bruno?
Oh, that's still a good question. Let me just answer the question and then tell you what I think about it. Compared to native performance, it will always lose. And that's because native can access and can use the phone in ways that websites will never be able to. But so if you want to compare speed, native performance will win, always. But if you are developing native apps, you have at least to create two versions of it. One for Android, one for iOS. And that's just the beginning. You can also build for Windows Phone. And then you'll have to create a version for the web, the desktop, and you have to create another version for mobile. So not for every app or website it's applicable to create a new version. You may not have the budget to do it. So if you think about the future, internet will only be faster and faster, and the phones will also be faster and faster because of the power that we'll have. So if you're on a limited budget, you have to go just creating one good responsive website, and it will do. It will just do. If you have the budget right now, create apps. In the future, you might not have to. So that's my insight about it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Bruno. And actually, I'm just looking on to the GoToMeeting, and at the moment we don't have any additional questions. We'll just wait a couple of extra seconds to see if any final questions come in. But assuming we don't, oh, actually we do. No, we just answered one of those questions before. So actually with that, I would like to bring the webinar to a close. I'd like to say many thanks to Bruno for sharing your knowledge. Also, thank you everyone on the line today for taking the time out of your days to join us today. I hope it's been interesting for you. I hope perhaps it's raised some new points for you. If you would like to continue the conversation, or if you have questions which come to you, in reflecting on this webinar, then please do reach out to us. We're here. We love sharing our knowledge. We love sharing our thoughts and improving our abilities. So absolutely feel free to continue that conversation. You can see our contact details here on the slide. And with that, I would like to say many thanks and have a good day to everyone.
Okay, thank you, Charles, and thank the audience.